As established by the news agency Niezależna, one of the perpetrators of the sabotage on the Polish railway line from Warsaw to Ukraine is Yevhen Ivanov, a Ukrainian citizen and collaborator of the Russian military intelligence service GRU since at least 2024. In 2024, the Ukrainian media reported on his failed attempt to blow up a Ukrainian drone factory in Lviv. In the same year, he was recruited by Russian military intelligence officer Yuri Sitsov. On the orders of Yuri Sitsov, an officer of the GRU commanding a sabotage network in Ukraine, Ivanov recruited a man called Borysenko, a former employee of a drone factory in Lviv, with the task of blowing up a strategic facility. The operation failed. The Ukrainian security service detected the explosives and, through Borysenko, who was supposed to plant them, tracked down Ivanov. Unfortunately, Ivanov had already left Ukraine by then. He was charged with treason and sabotage for transferring explosives. The above information is publicly available on the internet. The question is, why didn't the Polish services make use of it? This man entered Poland by crossing the border. He also left Poland across the border after committing this act without anyone bothering him. This is an immense failure of the entire Polish counterintelligence and security system. The government's information policy has a blatant coordination problem and communication delays. The Polish services acted post factum, but counterintelligence failed to identify anything in time, and the perpetrators, after carrying out the act of sabotage on the tracks, were able to leave Poland freely through the border crossing with Belarus in Terespol. Since 2023, the Polish secret services have been aware of the Russian modus operandi when it comes to monitoring railway routes. Mobile phones and cameras were already being used there, as well as various types of devices designed to monitor moving wagons, such as GPS sensors. There were also discussions among the members of this criminal group, controlled by Russian intelligence, about carrying out a more serious attack on one of the railway lines. Sometime before current Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and his coalition government took power, a network of several saboteurs working in Poland on behalf of the Kremlin was broken up. Why are these strategic railway lines not protected against the threat of sabotage? All the way back in 2023, the Internal Security Agency uncovered a sabotage network that intended to cause a tragedy in the form of derailing trains running on lines in the eastern part of our country. Since the coalition led by Donald Tusk took power, a lot has changed. The change was evident with the handling of the case of the alleged Spanish journalist known as Pablo González, who is in fact Colonel Pavel Rubtsov of the Russian GRU. He was extradited to Moscow. Rubtsov, who was extradited to Russia by Poland, was given very important and valuable information before his extradition. He was given the files of his own case to review, which allowed him to obtain additional and valuable information about the operational work of Polish services. According to experts, the knowledge, including secret information from the investigation that Rubtsov took with him when he left Poland, could have influenced the tactics of the Russian services. The GRU changed its methods of operation, shifting largely to recruiting proxy agents through the internet, using various online tools and building bots that were directed at specific communities in order to recruit agents. And the threat from Putin's Russia is not diminishing. That is why it is high time for the current Polish authorities to finally wake up. We should be vigilant, observe reality, and hope that the politicians responsible for the security system will not make such mistakes. And if they do, we should ensure that such politicians are removed from office. So far, the Tusk government's main success has been to establish the identity of the perpetrators of sabotage on the railway line, long after the saboteurs had already escaped into Belarus.
Ideological madness has dire consequences. Germans are emigrating from their country en masse. This is yet another European country that is becoming depopulated of its ethnic inhabitants. According to German media reports, nearly 300,000 people left for other countries last year. Berlin is the third most visited city in Europe. But only for a moment, because we are talking about tourism. However, the everyday quality of life in the German capital is not rated so highly. The crisis of security on the Spree River is a result of terrorist attacks, such as the one in Charlottenburg, when an Islamic terrorist murdered a Polish truck driver and then drove his truck into a crowd of people at a Christmas market. Even then, it was clear that migrants from Africa and the Middle East were not assimilating. New arrivals, often poorly educated and from the lower social classes, simply refuse to accept the conditions that exist in Europe. Germany is paying the price for its 2014 open border policy, initiated by Donald Tusk's friend, Angela Merkel. What is happening? Obviously, the demographic structure is changing, but the German economy is also starting to run into trouble. Germany is on the brink of recession, and sometimes it falls into recession. A symbolic moment of economic turmoil is 2020, when for the first time in many years, the budget surplus disappears, and Germany records a deficit. Our wind industry is currently facing serious problems, German Minister Peter Altmaier told Clean Energy Wire during a wind industry summit organized by the Federal Ministry of Economy.
Im ucieka przemysł.
Their industry is fleeing. The industry is fleeing from them in panic. The energy transition is failing. Stories about saving the climate remain a pipe dream. Wind turbines instead of coal are unprofitable, and the cost of living for Germans is rising. Germany is an expensive country. You have to be wealthy to live comfortably. That is why towns like Löcknitz in the east of the country are becoming increasingly rare, and more often you can read reports like this one. Ronnie Sveda, after years of working in Berlin, moved with his family to Andalusia. As he explains, despite his extensive qualifications and running a company with 10 employees, working in the German capital did not provide him with a satisfactory standard of life. I had a company with 10 employees, but as the managing director, after paying the salaries, I had almost nothing left. What's more, Poland has been pushing its way into the global economy quite strongly in recent years. Competition in the Baltic Sea in the form of the container port in Świnoujście was extremely dangerous for German interests, and so the port construction project implemented by our previous government was rejected by the current government.
Problem polega na tym, że
The problem is that our economies are extremely similar. The German response to multiculturalism and the Green Deal is simple. They vote with their feet and move to countries where this experiment is not yet being carried out with full force. What is frightening is that the current Polish government is forcing us to look uncritically towards Berlin, using blackmail over the war in Ukraine or leaving the European Union. I know how this mechanism works. Some people, especially those on the right, have never mentally joined the European Union. However, that's not the point, but a simple reflection. Considering the problems of the EU countries that lead the community does not mean repeating their mistakes. That's all. However, that's a lot. Because in recent years, the trend of emigration from one's own country, also as a result of dissatisfaction with the quality of life, can also be seen in Sweden. What's more, some Swedes have chosen Poland. For Swedes, Poland was a reminder of their own country in the 1970s and 1980s, especially in terms of personal safety. Over the past 7 years, nearly 500,000 citizens have left Sweden. Two identical cases and two completely different verdicts. The Italian Supreme Court has decided to extradite a Ukrainian suspected of involvement in the bombing of the Nord Stream gas pipeline in 2022. The Ukrainian was arrested in August in Rimini on the basis of a European arrest warrant. He appealed the verdict several times. One of the judges rejecting the extradition request pointed out that the action was a military act of defensive warfare, not civil sabotage. Despite this, the Court of Cassation ultimately agreed to the extradition. This is a completely different stance than that of the Polish court, which refused to extradite another Ukrainian suspected of sabotage.
Niezależnie od tego,
Regardless of who blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines, as long as they acted within the framework of a just, defensive war on behalf of Ukraine, they did not commit a crime. Neither the Italian nor the German judiciary shares this opinion. Serhi's defense attorney pointed out that at the time of the gas pipeline explosion, he was a soldier in the Ukrainian armed forces, so even if he was behind the operation, he was following orders. I would absolutely not count on a fair trial for this man in the Federal Republic of Germany, for the simple reason that the current policy of the individual chancellors of the Federal Republic of Germany has been, contrary to public opinion, relatively pro-Ukrainian, while public opinion in Germany is unfortunately pro-Russian. And if German courts are also contaminated by this, there is a very high risk that it will be a show trial, where this man will be in a very bad position. As analysts point out, Germany needs to prosecute and convict someone. The damage caused by the attack on the gas pipeline was enormous, but it is also a matter of image.
224 kilometers.
We stand with Ukraine and will continue to support it. But it is important to me that we are a country governed by the rule of law and that we thoroughly investigate crimes committed within our jurisdiction. For a long time, it was believed that Russia itself could have carried out the sabotage. It had its own interest in doing so, a crisis that could discourage support for Kiev.
But I think if we look at who would actually benefit from disturbances, more chaos on the gas market in Europe, I think there's basically only one actor right now that actually benefits from more uncertainty, and that is Russia. Russia that is using gas exactly as a pressure point to sort of put pressure on Europe to essentially give up the support for Ukraine in the Ukraine war.
Ultimately, this did not work. In fact, it prompted Berlin to seek alternative gas supplies. However, it is not certain that the German authorities consider this an advantage. What is more, the lack of convictions for the attack on the Russian-German investment could cast a shadow over future relations between Berlin and Moscow, which many politicians in the Bundestag are certainly counting on.
The United States will attempt to end the bloody civil war in Sudan. Following Donald Trump's meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Washington decided to join the group of countries trying to resolve the conflict. For several weeks, there has been recurrent slaughter of civilians in the Darfur region. Rogue militias rebelling against the authorities in Khartoum captured al-Fashir, the last bastion of Sudanese government forces in Darfur, in the southwest of the country, at the end of October. Since then, the militants have been conducting regular purges there, already described as genocide on a scale not seen in years. There are already tens of thousands of victims, including women and children, methodically murdered simply for living in and around the rebel-occupied city.
We want safe passage in for our convoys, our trucks, our humanitarian workers, safe passage out for the survivors, for the civilians. And then I'm also asking the world, as I said to the Security Council 2 weeks ago, to step up to the plate and start to deliver the diplomatic process, the peacemaking, the diplomacy that these people so badly need.
Until recently, the rebels were part of Sudan's official security forces as the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. In 2023, their commander attempted to overthrow the leader of Sudan and the head of the Sudanese army. Since then, a civil war has been raging between the two generals, which Islamic militants are also exploiting.
The army was demanding that the RSF integrate fully into the army and essentially dissolve as a militia force. The RSF, meanwhile, wanted to maintain its power and saw itself as just as powerful as the army itself. This dispute eventually grew out of control and it led to the fighting in Khartoum. But over the course of this war now, both sides have essentially sucked in the Sudanese across the country into their respective camps. And it's become an all-out battle for Sudan's future.
The problem is that the conflict in Sudan is constantly being fueled by foreign players. Accusations are being made against the United Arab Emirates, Libya, and Russia. This is because there are gold mines in the areas controlled by the militants, and the RSF is promising concessions in exchange for weapons.
And the support that the RSF is getting as they continue with their advances, I think it's telling, the humanitarian groups are telling us that some of the levels of malnutrition and suffering that they're seeing from some of these people who have been able to flee is unprecedented. They've recorded things they've never recorded before. And I think even more troubling is that they didn't have the number of refugees they expected to receive because they assume many of them are either dead or so sick and malnourished they can't move anymore. So what's happening there is horrifying.
That is why the countries in the region want the conflict to end as soon as possible. However, they need an influential and powerful ally. And today, that can only be the United States.
His Majesty would like me to do something very powerful having to do with Sudan. It was not on my my charts to be involved in that. I thought it was just something that was crazy and out of control. But I just see how important that is to you and to a lot of your friends in the room. Sudan, and we're going to start working in Sudan.
The Americans can support Khartoum with arms supplies, but they can also carry out airstrikes on rebel bases. After the attacks on Iran, Yemen, and the peace campaign in the Middle East, Donald Trump is gaining a reputation as a decisive peacemaker who strikes first and then dictates the terms of the peace.